Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to As You Pass By, and I'm James West. We're back here on the roof, overlooking the beautiful East Village, and actually you can see Midtown Manhattan in the background. So today we're going to talk about the Spies of New York, and in particular, the spies that were in New York during the latter part of World War I. The reality is that there have always been spies here. As soon as New York City established itself as a commercial center, a trading center, transportation hub, banking center, the larger it got and the more important it got, the more likely it was that somebody was spying on us. So we're going to focus on one period of time that was roughly the last couple of years of World War I. But in 1916, the United States was still neutral in the European conflict, and there were quite a bit of Germans in New York City doing business here. And it was sort of the plan of Woodrow Wilson to not ruffle any feathers and not to get involved in the war. And one of the designs that the Germans had was to devise a plan whereby Mexico would declare war on the United States. So the United States would be too distracted to get involved in the European war. Well, it didn't really happen, but there were some serious efforts to make it happen. And you may remember from history class something called the Zimmerman telegram. That was basically a coded telegram, and it was intercepted by the British to the Mexicans to sort of lay out the scope of what they wanted Mexico to do. And so it was known to the Americans pretty much as soon as it was sent that this was the intention. And it was one of the main reasons that the United States did finally get involved in the war, because they saw that this was, a serious plan that was taking place. There were a number of Germans in Mexico, of the High Command, the Admiralty, ambassadors, but there was also a very large presence of Germans, Austrians, Russians, and Mexicans in the city, in New York City at that time. Starting around 1916, there were a number of German agents located in downtown. The Austrian Evidence Bureau had several agents located around 45 Broadway, which at the time was a very ornate and beautiful building called the Aldrich House. Very few pictures exist of it. We'll take you down there later and wander around what's there now. There's no remnants of the Aldrich House. There are, however, remnants of 55 Water Street, which is where one of the main engineers of the espionage in New York City was located. His name was Franz von Riedelen, and he was a member of the German Royal Navy, and he was located at 55 Liberty Street under several aliases: E.V. Gibbons, Emil Gash, and he formulated two different companies there. One was the Northwest Mexican Railway Company, and the other one was the E.V. Gibbons Company, which was supposedly an importing-exporting firm. He also had offices right around the corner on 57 William Street, which is also no longer there. The building itself, there is a location, but it's been rebuilt many times. So, and he operated there with a trust company. Quite a lot of money was invested in this, and the goal of von Riedelen was to sabotage ships in the New York City harbor that were bound with arms and also supplies to the British, the French, and the Russians. And one of the things they did was they put timed bomb devices inside the hulls of these ships. Not sure how they got in, but they were placed in the hulls, and then the ships would explode in the middle of the ocean. maybe days after they had left port. And one of the most famous of all of these sabotage exploits was the Black Tom Island catastrophe, which took place in 2016. Black Tom Island was a series of warehouses and docks that would load barges and ships with ammunitions, with supplies, with all kinds of things that would be bound for Europe. Through the efforts of von Rintelen, there was a large explosion there. Numbers of people died, but also the loss in terms of the dollar value of some of the equipment and material that was being transported was enormous. And it was a big blow to the Allied war effort. So, and there were also Americans who were, had their eye on all of these characters, and they were following them around. There was no such thing as the CIA back then or the FBI. They did not exist. So there were some officers of the Justice Department who were following around some of the Austrian and German spies, and a lot of that took place at the Holland House, which is actually still standing on the corner of 30th Street and 5th Avenue. Beautiful hotel, and it was one of the favorite places of von Rintelen and some of the other German and Austrian spies at the time. They also liked staying at the Manhattan Hotel, which was at Madison Avenue and 42nd Street. It hasn't been there since the 50s, but also a very sort of grand hotel in the 19th century style, very lavish. And it was also one of the world's largest hotels. So we're going to take a look at all these spots and take you back in time to 1917, when the city was awash with spies. In fact, some people described it as when you walk into the Hotel Manhattan, it's like a spy convention, because there were so many spies spying on each other, including the Mexicans, including the Russians, none of whom had any real idea of what was going on or who was doing what to whom. And also bear in mind, Mexico had just finished its own revolution, so there was a lot of upheaval and turmoil that was still sort of ripping through Mexico. The plot to embroil Mexico in the First World War did not succeed, and ultimately, later that year in 1917, the Germans sunk the Lusitania, which was a single event that brought us into the war. Would the Zimmerman telegram alone have been enough? Maybe. There's some speculation that Wilson was about to side with the Allies and bring America into the war, but the Lusitania sinking was really the last straw. Anyway, so welcome back again, and remember to like and subscribe, and also remember to leave comments. We love your comments. I try and respond to all of them, and it's great to hear from you. If you have any ideas or suggestions, or if you think I missed something or got it wrong, let me know, and I'll respond, and everyone will read them. Here we are on Liberty Street in Nassau. It's kind of a cool outdoor space. This is what used to be the One Chase Plaza right here, built in 1959. Hard to believe, right? And then we're looking south toward Wall Street. You can see, actually no, you can't. The stock exchange is a little bit farther too. If I walk down 2 steps, you can see it. But that's not why we're here today. Anyway, over here on the corner of Liberty and Nassau is, let me zoom out a little bit more, is the beautiful 55 Liberty Street Tower, sometimes called the Nassau Liberty Tower, built in I'm going to try and get a little more distance, 1911, and it was originally built to house just no particular tenant. That happened later, but it was meant for insurance companies, lawyers, bankers, and things like that. This was the first location of Franz von Ritalin as far as his business was concerned. Von Ritalin arrived in New York City in 1916 on a Swiss passport aboard a Swedish steamship, and he immediately set himself up here under the name of Emil V. Gash and then E.V. Gibbons, and formed the E.V. Gibbons Company, and was also the same office as the Mexican Northwest Railway Company. Quite a lot of money was sunk into those two businesses. And by the way, this building was also where Franklin Delano Roosevelt first had his law office in maybe 1912, 1911, when the building was first built. It's actually a fascinating building. You can't see all the details, but it's probably worth an episode on its own. But it's the tallest building in Manhattan built on this size of a land plot. It's not the tallest building in the world, it never was, but considering the small size of the plot, it's quite tall. Von Ritalin was here to carry out sabotage orders against the United States shipping companies and to some degree the Navy. He was here along with some of his fellow saboteurs from the Austrian Evidence Bureau, and it was also here at 55 Liberty Street that the famous Zimmerman telegram was first conceived of. The Zimmerman telegram was designed to entice the United States into a war with Mexico, which would, of course, the theory went, would prevent the United States from entering the war on behalf of England. There was never a war with Mexico. Mexico wasn't really interested in a war. They had already just finished having their own revolution, but the city at the time was filled with spies from many different countries, including Mexico, Russia, who unknowingly did a lot of the shipping of arms in boats that had been sabotaged and that later exploded. We're still in front of the old Chase, number 1 Chase Plaza, walking around, just basically around the corner from 55 Liberty to 57 William Street, which is gone now, but it would have been roughly at the corner of this plaza, and it possibly may have been where the brown brick building is just behind the flag, which is sort of an annex of 40 Wall Street now. But we're going to go over there in just a second. So we're down here under the scaffolding at William and Pine Street, between Pine and Wall. Wall Street's right over there. And this building is new, I mean, compared to when these activities took place. So 57 William Street would have been right about where I'm pointing the camera right now. And the building is no longer here. But this is where the same Franz von Ritalin created another company, and it was called the Transatlantic Trust Company at 57 William Street, where he also deposited quite a lot of funds that were made available to him by the Imperial German government and possibly also the Austrian government. The Austrian government was operating in secret under the guise of the Evidence Bureau. Mr. Rintelen had taken on another alias by then, which was Frederick Hansen at 57 William Street. Back then, all these streets here, even where you see the more modern Chase building, this was a warren of smaller buildings, and they were all jumbled together. I don't even have a photograph of 57 William Street, but there probably were about 6 or 7 office buildings along this block, on this side of the block, back in 1915, 1920. So, and it was from here that the sabotage plans took place for what became known as the Black Tom Island disaster, which took place, which was basically an attempt by the German government to sabotage the ships that were leaving with supplies for England. Some of them were artillery. A lot of the supplies were also bound for the Russian Empire. And what happened was they were placed on board ships that had already been mined, and bombs had been placed on board the ships, and they were sunk en route. So, but the factory at Black Tom Island, which I'll show you on a map, was very substantially destroyed. Hundreds of millions of dollars in dollars of those days worth of merchandise and ammunitions and materials lost. It was a huge setback for the Allied war effort, and it all happened right here. This modern building is 45 Broadway, and this is where Aldrich Court used to be. I have some pretty nice photos of that, and the building itself was long gone. It was demolished probably in the late 70s to make way for this more modern building. But this was what was known as the Aldrich Court, and this was one of the locations of the nest of spy rings that existed in New York City back in 1915, 1916, and then sort of culminated in 1917 when the United States entered World War I. The building, there's nothing left of the building now, as you can see, although I want to guess that this building over here with the Fridays, formerly Fridays, in it was probably a remnant of, it was probably around when the Aldrich Court was here. It's quite old, but yeah, nothing else. And anyway, the person who was in charge of this branch of German intelligence was named Karl Boyed, and he was part of naval intelligence, and they were largely involved in sabotage and the sinking of ships and the destruction of some of the harbors and infrastructure that would prevent ships from loading up with cargo for the war effort. You can see down there, Battery Place. Can't really see it. Bowling Green is straight ahead. And if we look uptown, well, it's rainy today. It's very foggy, so you can't see very much. So we're across the street now. You can see a little better what 45 Broadway looks like. The former site of the Aldrich Court. Something's going on down there. I don't know what. And this older building here as well. Right next to, actually it's not next to, it's Exchange Place is just over there. There's a very tiny alley that's largely covered right now. But anyway, here we are. This is Lower Broadway. It's a rainy day. Seems to be a lot going on.